So I'm honored to introduce Kevin and Simona, but I promise to keep it short. You came to hear Kevin, not me. I'll just note that Kevin is an assistant professor of church history at Andrews, specializes in American religious history with a focus on minority religions and evangelicalism, particularly in reference to religious intolerance, politics, race, and gender. He joined the Department of Church History at Seminary in 2021.
You did your homework.
Also serves as director of Andrews' Center for Adventist Research, president-elect of the Association of Adventist Historians. And he serves as a graduate student mentor for the Society of Historians of the Early American Republic. He received the Porterfield Prize in 2022, which recognizes excellence in research by a graduate student at Florida State University. In 2023, he defended his doctoral dissertation with distinction, and in 2024, he was selected to participate in the prestigious Young Scholars in American Religion program hosted by the Center for Study of American Religion and American Culture at Indiana University. The point is, he's a serious historian who has published a serious historical work. And when I started underlining in there, I realized I was underlining just about every other line. But noteworthy is that despite stereotypes that those involved in the mid-19th century Second Great Awakening and how maybe they were or were not involved in social reform movements, and the fact that modern historians sometimes seem to deliberately obscure that, in fact, apocalyptic evangelicals were very active in supporting social reform movements, including the abolition of slavery, something that seems very different now from the standard stereotype of some evangelicals. All right, and I also want to introduce Simona Mills-Pitcher, Associate Chaplain at Andrews. She grew up in Brooklyn, graduated from Atlantic Union College, worked in public health, but she and her husband also lived in Bermuda for 16 years.
Man.
Somebody had to do it.
She's dedicated
Sign
to her
me up.
work as a chaplain to both students and colleagues, and has participated in previous book launches. When I met her, when I stopped by her office, I said I'd stay for just a couple minutes, just wanted to meet her. An hour later, I left, but that was my fault. But she's a great conversationalist, and she can help anybody connect with a book's content. Her email motto is, say what you mean and mean what you say when it counts. So, Kevin and Simona.
All right. Thank you, John.
All right, so this is going to be nice and casual. I may just even pop up and move about the room purposefully. So I hope that's not going to be too much for you all. But I want to say when he asked me to do this, I was honored. I was beyond honored. And so I said, drop the book off. And so when he dropped the book off and I saw the colors, I was like, so when I do book launches, I like to wear the color scheme. No. Wouldn't be able to do it, right?
Yeah, all good.
Good. But, when I started diving into the book, I was just amazed. So I'm going to tell you this. Here's my disclaimer. When I was studying in the seminary many, many moons ago, each class had this list of reading. Books that you could kind of read, but I ended up having to read over 100 books for 5 classes, and I started panicking because I didn't even know. Sorry, I was panicking because at the end they tell you, sign if you have read these books. Sign and date it that you've read every book. I was in a conundrum. I didn't know what to do. And so I went to learning support and I said, I need to figure out how to do this well. And so I took speed reading class. I took part 1 and part 2. So If you ask me if I've read this entire book, yes, I did. But I did take the time to dive into two of my favorite chapters, and we're going to go ahead and ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up for you all as well. This is going to be free-flowing and the whole nine. But when I saw the word apocalyptic, the first word, right? I'm like, apocalyptic? Oh, that's not easy reading, right? But it brings this whole doom and drama, right? To this whole thing. And then I'm looking at everything and I'm saying, okay, what is this really about? So someone is walking by right now, maybe. They see this book here. What do you want them to first think about this book?
That's a great question. I think that I often tell people, this is a story about how apocalypticism is combined with abolitionism. And I usually get kind of confused looks because people don't usually think about those two things together. And I say that's exactly why the book's interesting. And so this book is challenging on an academic level. It's challenging about a century's worth of scholarship that says that you cannot have these things together. And so if you believe that the world is about to end or that Jesus is coming soon or something like that, you will not try to do anything to make the world a better place because God's about to come and fix it all. So you're so heavenly minded, you're of no earthly good. And so I was curious to know if that's really what apocalypticism was like, because you could consider me to be an apocalyptic person, I suppose. And I've never thought that way. I've thought, well, I'm here, and I know I'm here, and I need to do the most I can to help this world be as good as it can while I'm here. Right. So I just wanted to know who was right on this front, and so I wrote the book and found out that answer.
And you too will find out that answer when you buy and read the book. What I loved about the introduction, just how you have the introduction, for those of you that have it, it kind of gives you a guide into how to read this book. I find that, and I know that seems simplistic, but for any age that's reading this book, it's helpful. It kind of opens up what you're about to digest. And I loved, there's a few quotes, so I have 14 pages of notes, just small notes, that I wanted to share. But I focused in on chapter 1 and chapter 3. Those were my favorites.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite chapter? I wonder, just wonder.
That's a great question. I like all of them in some way. I do, but it depends on my mood. Some days I just love talking about Abigail Folsom, whom you'll get to meet. Other days I just love talking about Millerite worship experiences and what they do when they're trying to liberate slaves in some way, shape, or form, or when they're trying to fight against Jim Crow racial segregation practices. It's just, it's just inspiring to me, actually.
Okay, so I'm gonna look at, I took out some quotes, and I want to start with I'm going to go in chapter 1. And I want to tell you that this resonated with me as a chaplain, just how well written and how honest this book is. And I know that's your MO. There's something you say in here. Apocalyptic belief did not make reformers retreat from history. It drove them deeper into it. Tell me, why is that?
Yeah, really, it's a lot about trying to prepare to meet Jesus. So this book focuses a lot on a group of people that are known as the Millerites. If you don't know who they are, the Millerites came from all the different evangelical churches of the day. And so it was kind of like a parachurch movement. And they are preparing and they're striving to meet Jesus. They think he's coming back in 1843 or 1844. And so because of that, they say we need to prepare ourselves, make sure that we are free from sin and right with God, and also help save as many people as we can. And they're doing this in an era where almost every single Christian person in the North as well as the South won't even call slavery a sin. And so they're in a 1 or 2% minority of the northern population. And so that's what it's about, and I think that's one of the core things that drives them even more emphatically into this. And there are contemporaries who say, that these abolitionists are the best of the bunch. And so that's really interesting to see.
Okay, so I'm going to go to one of my favorite chapters, chapter 1, and this chapter begins to challenge you and challenge the idea that abolition was just political reform. And I found that very interesting, that it's not just about the politics, but it's about understanding a nation. And it tells me here that this nation was sinning. And I'm saying, okay, how does that even work? And with the great disappointment, what does that mean? So tell me, these abolitionists were saying that this nation, if they are truly a great nation, would stop sinning because slavery was a divine offense. And it almost felt like they were prophetic. So could we call abolitionists prophets?
I think in the broad sense of that term prophet, that's right. If you think about a prophet as someone who just simply speaks a truth that is not well received in its day, right? And so in that very general, somewhat secular even kind of sense, yes, I do think they're all prophets. And yet at the same time, it's not a secular story because they're doing this because of their faith in God. And so it simply comes down to for them about this idea of a golden rule. If do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so they are trying to live that out as they prepare to meet Jesus. Yeah.
And so I'm going to ask you, what emotional atmosphere did the urgency among the believers kind of build? What was the urgency? Like, why was this such a big deal?
Well, I think there had been apocalyptic movements before this for sure, but there was a convergence in something really electric about the 1840s in particular, and the way that people were calculating, with a lot of the biblical books like Revelation and Daniel 8:14 and the 2300 days and all this kind of stuff. They were doing this math that was literally pointing to this decade that they're living in. And that added a sense of authority when it's coming from the Bible, and you see several commentators that are supporting this kind of thing, and you hear more and more people, believing it and so forth. And so this time actually enhances this, and there's a lot of authority from their way that they do exegesis and read the Bible. And so I think the time element is crucial because the abolitionists, generally speaking, were all immediatists. They were demanding for the immediate and total abolition of slavery. And they wanted equal rights for black people in America. But the Millerite abolitionists, they actually add a deadline. And so they say, it's coming soon, but it's coming even sooner than a lot of you think. And if you're not prepared to meet your God by this rough date, and then they got specific later, that added a lot of pressure. And so apocalypticism, if you think about it rhetorically, it is actually a very effective tool for social justice because you are actually not really condemning somebody, but you're warning them of a dangerous place that they're in, but there is a time left for them to repent. And so it's a threat suspended, as one scholar that I quote calls it. It's a threat that's suspended. And so apocalypticism has the capacity, as you see in this book, to be an incredibly powerful and effective tool to make this world actually a better place before it might burn.
And I love that. I wrote a key takeaway for me was that believers thought slavery was not just wrong, but that it threatened America's relationship with God.
That's right.
And I mean, when I sat there and I said, man, can you imagine?
Yeah.
And even in today, like, why is this relevant? Why is this really relevant today for you? Why do you think we really need to read this book?
Well, it personally changed my life a lot, actually. I started this book with the sort of idea that I think a lot of people in my faith tradition have, which is that you just avoid politics, you avoid getting engaged, God will take care of all of this stuff. And when I started to look at these people in this era and their faith and how it inspired them, and saw what they were doing. I started to ask myself, what am I doing myself? And so it's actually changed my life significantly. I think it's brought me closer to God. I think writing this book has done that for me. I hope it does it for everybody else who reads it. But it's also helped me to have my faith really grounded. I think sometimes we are guilty of being too theologically minded, and I love theology, so don't take that the wrong way. But if we keep it in such a theoretical space, and if our faith is not actually lived out to where it meaningfully changes people's lives, it's worthless. We can call that by its rightful name, friends. I think it's demon theology, because the book of James says that even the demons believe, but they shudder. What don't they do? They don't actually engage in those good works, right? And so we're not saved, of course, by works and all of that. It's by God's grace. And yet it's a privilege that we have to serve him as his hands and feet. So
I love that. I wonder what would happen if people believed that God cares not just about souls, but about the systems and about the things that happen in our world. Okay.
Yep.
I am popping to chapter 3.
Okay.
All right. Chapter 3.
Is that the Mavericks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Maverick assaults on oppressive systems. It's just, guys, music drama could just build under that.
This is a fun chapter.
Yeah, it really is. I have some notes on here, and I wanna stay true to that before I go off script. So, I loved it because it kind of shifts the broad theological movements to understand the radical activism that was happening in here. So I have a little summary for me. It explores radical abolitionists called Come Outers, right? They did speak-ins.
Yep.
No organizationists. Right?
There's a glossary. I'm using the terms that they use.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved
Yeah.
it. And there were reformers who believed that churches, institutions, and denominations were morally corrupt.
That's right.
Right? So instead of reforming from within, many people kind of withdrew instead of just reforming. Tell me a little bit about, before we go into speak-ins, what this chapter was really bouncing about.
This is one of the things I learned early on. A lot of people assume incorrectly, and there are even some historians who have unwisely made this claim without the data, that the evangelicals were the driving force of the anti-slavery movement. And I learned actually quite slowly that really wasn't true. It took me till the very end to realize how untrue that was. I did realize quite early that I couldn't tell this story without sort of challenging what we would call historiography and this sort of false narrative. And that's because, as it turns out, the overwhelming majority of the abolitionists left all their churches. And what is called come-outerism, they were coming out of Babylon. They identify the Protestant churches as Babylon because they are engaging in selling slaves in the souls of men. If you don't know that, that's a reference to Revelation 18, verse 13. There's a clear passage there where it connects slavery, human bondage, and trafficking with Babylon itself. And what does it say at the very beginning of that chapter? Verse 4, come out of her, my people. And so they all do. And so for a long time, I had thought, like, if you've ever heard of the denominational schisms, the Methodist and Baptist churches split in 1843, 44, it's really 44, 45. I had thought that those splits were, I think like most people do, that they were between abolitionists in the North and pro-slavery folks in the South. And that's not true. It's not true at all. What it was is it was definitely pro-slavery people in the South, but the Northerners were not abolitionists that were splitting with them. It was gradualists, people who wanted to slowly have slavery go away, that were willing to let it stay in the South as long as it didn't spread up north. And so the abolitionists had actually all left a year before that, or not all of them, but it was a process. But they had left before that. And so in order to understand this story, I had to deal with the fact that most Christians in this country were supportive of slavery in one way, shape, or form, either through their open advocacy or through their silence. or through other schemes like colonizationism, where you're trying to ship all the black people out of America to make it perfectly white. And so it's a hard story in a lot of ways. That, again, going back to relevance, I think it helps us it reminds us why America looks the way it does now. It's because it pretty much always has when it comes to something like race. It's a tough issue. And it's always been tough, I guess, for people who have my complexion.
And I appreciate that. And when I looked at some of the things they did to call awareness, the speak-ins. Now,
yes,
there was a lot of speak-ins. You want to talk a little bit about
sure.
speak-ins?
Yeah, speak-ins are a really fun thing. There was a lot of things that feel very much like what happened in the Civil Rights Movement, and speak-ins are one of those things. So in the 19th century, churches often had open meetings. And open meetings were times where anyone could come in and they could pray, they could offer testimonies, anyone had the right to speak, and however they wished. And so several abolitionists, these mavericks, who were very fun, they developed this tactic of speak-ins where they would go into one of these churches and use that freedom to condemn slavery. But every single time they did, they were violently ejected and often were incarcerated, jailed. I talk about one person, Thomas Parnell Beach, who was jailed for a, quote, indefinite period. Okay? Finally, that ended after 3 months, but he actually publishes an anti-slavery newspaper from prison called The Voice from the Jail. And he had his thumb, I don't get into all of the details of his story because of space, but like he had his thumb dislocated, and other people had their hair ripped out. Some people had their like chunks of their skin bitten off of them. So, I mean, people were violent, so violent, just because someone had the guts to say literally something like this: "Why aren't you praying for the slaves?" That's the kind of phrase they found so galling to forcibly eject them. To even ask if you can pray for the slaves, not even for their liberation, just to pray for them. And so that's what America was like. The overwhelming majority of Christians just couldn't stand it, even listening to the subject. Even the word itself was just verboten.
I appreciate that. There's so much more in that chapter, and I don't want to rob you of it, but I wanted to pull out a few key arguments.
Yeah.
Right?
Go
So
ahead.
you talk about apocalyptic belief, radicalized reform methods. There's an urgency in it. Institutions were seen now more compromised.
Mm-hmm.
Then you had this whole public disruption that we just talked about.
Yeah.
What do you think drove most people to push back against the abolitionists, push back against some of these things? What do you think drove them?
I think it really was the apocalyptic aspect of it. And apocalypticism was pretty broadly, it was a very widespread tactic used by almost every abolitionist. Whether or not they were a Millerite, they were involved in using apocalypticism in some way, shape, or form. And the thing about it is, I think at the heart of it is that if you look at the cover, Babylon here is depicted as this dragon, right, with the mother of harlots on her. And yet Bogdan, who's here, wherever he is the one who masterfully drew this image from primary sources. This is a beautiful piece of artwork that he did for this book. And Babylon is so intimately connected with that church building, you can't tell where Babylon the dragon and the church end and meet. And so it's intentional to show that they are one and the same. And so the abolitionists are recognizing that something like slavery and racism are not just a personal problem. They're systemic. These beasts and so forth that are described in Revelation, for example, they're describing systems of power, not individuals in power, but systems of power. And so they recognize that, and when they've said all of the systems in this country are broken, and they're vilely filled with evil because they're all supporting slavery somehow, among other things. It's not just that. There's intemperance, there's violence to women, there's all kinds of things that are going on. And when they point that out, and when they start to talk about the church itself, who everyone thinks is like sort of the saving ship that's going to get them out of hellfire. They're talking about this as actually a ship to hell itself. That's offensive. Just to put it bluntly, that's offensive. And so apocalyptic abolitionists, they raise the stakes tremendously, because this whole idea of coming out of Babylon, that's directly taken from the book of Revelation. That's an apocalyptic argument. And when about 100,000 of them come out, it's probably the largest mass exodus from evangelicalism, meaning all the different denominations in American history. And the Millerite group that we talk about a lot in this book, they're the largest group. They're about half of that entire total. And so they're the driving force of this thing.
Okay.
So
I like that. Kat, looking at the time, we can talk a little bit more, just a little bit more. I don't know if we want to field a few questions.
yeah, we can do that.
But I looked at this chapter, and it was important because you mentioned some things about women in leadership.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Okay, not biased at all.
Hey, nothing wrong with that.
So, how did the apocalyptic verbiage, this push, how did it kind of create space for women? And you introduced me to some women in here that I've never heard of before.
Yeah?
I would call their names, but you're just going to have to get the book.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Well, I think it's really interesting because I work and build off of the work of Catherine Breckus, who teaches at Harvard now. And she makes the argument that when you think about the scripture texts, like from Joel and later the book of Acts, where it talks about how women will prophesy and dream dreams and so forth, basically at the end of time, she makes the really amazing argument, which I also found to be true, that when a woman rose up to speak in a meeting, her actual body is being read as evidence that the world is in fact coming to an end. Because this is an era where women never did that, ever. And so to see a woman stand up and address a company of men and women, I guess it must be the end of the world. I mean, that's what the Bible says, right? So, I mean...
It's biblical. We'll take it.
Anyway, I mean, that's how they're thinking, right? So you can't make this stuff up, right?
True. So it's almost like they were, instead of being viewed as spiritual threats, they were spiritual truth tellers.
And they were threatening to those who didn't like this phenomenon, but then they are also that very thing. The Millerites gravitate to women speakers and give them so much more authority and space and power to do this. They are the most significant religious group in mid-19th century America for women's rights, hands down.
Yeah, and the book talks about a lot of the different movements that happened in this space, and I mean, it was really, I read this chapter twice, it was really empowering.
Thank you. I'm good.
It
I'm
was
glad.
refreshing, and I hope you feel like that as well when you read this book. And I want to ask for a more modern reflection. What can modern readers learn from people willing to risk reputation for conviction?
That is the hardest question, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've thought about that so many times because, in my faith tradition, we have a lot of people who expect us to be persecuted or face this at some point. And something that's become very clear to me in my research is that will never happen unless you are actively standing against the beastly forces that are described in Scripture. It will not. If you are simply quiet, if you are simply going along with the status quo, then you are not a threat. You will never be persecuted. You will never face trouble because you're an ally. You're an ally to the beastly powers themselves. And that's what silence does.
Yeah.
That's what silence does. And that's where I was challenged the most because it is hard to speak out and continue speaking out whenever you see injustice. Mm-hmm. I mean, does anyone need to have a reminder of that? Just look at the news for 30 seconds right now and you'll see that. the powers that be in this nation have never been more clearly, openly antagonistic to helping people who need help. And we think it a good thing to kick people out of this country and to, deny people rights that we don't think they should have. And my word, like, people doing that in the name of God, it's disgusting. And if we can't speak the truth that Jesus spoke himself, we will never be a threat. I don't want to be a threat, by the way. I'm not pining for martyrdom or something like that.
Neither.
I want to live a good life. I want to be safe. I do. And so there's a tension there. And, I think all of us are inspired by those heroic stories of people assisting Jews in World War II, or the people working on the Underground Railroad or something like this. But my word, if we're not active in doing this work of justice now, those are just stories and fantasies for us. They're not in any way real, and we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that we are somehow better because we like those stories.
Say that again.
Oh man, I love that, and it helps you kind of wrestle with what it might have felt like for them to have this kind of what I call loneliness of conviction. For those of us that want to speak up and speak out, it can be very lonely.
Yeah.
Right? And there's so many stories in here about
Yep.
how that conviction made most of them feel very lonely.
Yeah.
And you really did a good job on kind of painting each individual person that you're talking about in here sometimes. And then the whole collective, I love that. And I really don't want to talk anymore about it because I'll give away the whole chapter. You're going to have to buy the book, guys. All right? But you showed us that God cares and that history mattered. This is what I got from this. History matters and that God cares. And that if we remain silent, then we too are part of the crazy that is surrounding us. And it doesn't mean that we do sit-ins or speak-ins or we do that,
Yeah.
but we kind of act differently, right? We act differently towards each other. We do something that's a little bit more meaningful. And this here is almost like a blueprint of some of the things that we can do. I love that you've just kind of opened this up. I'm gonna if anyone has a question, I'll let you ask a question if you have a question now. If not, there's a hand.
One of the things that always fascinated me, the apocalyptic abolitionist movement didn't protest against Jim Crow much. Even Ellen White said, okay, we have to be careful, people are getting killed. So the speak outs, they kind of went silent in the Jim Crow era.
Yeah, you're talking about the Southern Jim Crow era.
Right.
But
the North too. Look, I grew up in Hinsdale, which is a
Yep.
sunset town.
Yep.
People of color
Yep.
could not be on the streets after sunset.
Yep.
Including Koreans.
Yep, that's right. Now, one of the things I show in this book, I think a lot of people don't know, is that Jim Crow was a Northern invention.
Yeah.
And it was invented before the Civil War.
Right.
And so I talk about how this group of people is very actively engaged, and there is so much more I could have put in the book if I had was given the word count. No one would want to read a long book, though. To show that they are very strongly protesting against Jim Crow segregation in the North during this period of time. And later, the antecedents or the descendants of this group, Seventh-day Adventists, they really do push against it initially. But it gets to the point when actual lives are threatened and one person dies, that they end up saying, well, provisionally until God shows us a better way.
They became gradualists.
They became, yeah, I mean, that's a very different period of time, and it's I wish they would have made a different choice, I'll say that. But I also as a historian recognize the challenge, because when Ellen White's son was threatened,
Right.
and her daughter-in-law, and others,
My
and
mom.
both black and white Adventist people are saying, please, we have to stop to save our lives. And so I can understand. I wish it could have been different, but America would have had to been different to make it possible to do what needed to be done.
The energy seemed to go out of the movement.
I think so, to some degree. I think it slowly goes away. Certainly by the 20th century, it's pretty much gone. And that's one of the things for my own faith community that I hope they'll get out of this book, is I hope that they will remember who they are or were.
But I think it's important to remember, it's not to the 1960s.
Yeah.
So we're not talking that long ago.
No. Yeah. The 1860s are vastly different than the 1960s for Adventists.
Right.
They're very different, and it's a tragedy. But sadly, it's not just a story about Adventism. The Wesleyan Methodists, the second largest group that came out of that were abolitionists, they have a very similar story where fundamentalism kind of takes over in the early 20th century, and they become they're on the wrong side of the civil rights movement too. So a lot of the really staunch and the largest religious groups of this period of this book, their longer history. Even Oberlin College gets to the point where they racially segregate and so forth. So, I mean, it's just a sad tale. It's a sad story, but that's a different story. But it's a very important one too. Like, yeah, it's very important to keep that in mind. Yeah.
Do you have another question?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You chose New York University Press for your publisher.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
You didn't choose a religious publisher.
I did not.
Who's your intended audience, and how did that fit into?
Yeah, I wanted to reach every person in this country and people outside who care about this topic, because slavery was a global problem. I was very fortunate to work with New York University Press. They're one of the very top presses in my field. And so it was just an honor and a privilege to have that contract. And I'll say a thanks to John Corrigan, my doctoral advisor at Florida State, who helped me get that contract with them. But yeah, I very much intentionally, the whole way through this project, have had a broad audience in mind. And I want as many people who will read it to read it. So I think the story is of interest and of value to virtually everybody. So I don't think you have to be an Adventist like I am, for example, to appreciate it. Yeah.
Academic audience or more a general audience?
Well, I try to do a little bit of both. If you find the introduction a little bit heavy, just skip to chapter 1. But I'm making a big argument in this book. Academically, it's pretty huge because I'm attacking's too strong. It's too apocalyptic. I am challenging 3 major fields of study. I'm challenging evangelical historiography, this idea that the evangelicals were the driving force of the anti-slavery movement. Not true. I'm challenging the dominant theories of apocalypticism that says if you believe that the world is about to end, then you're just going to retreat and you're not going to engage in the world at all. That's not true. Generally speaking, maybe there are some people who fit that bill, but not everybody. I mean, they were writing about everybody that way. And then this book puts Adventist abolitionists into the story. They've never been there.
Right.
And I show that if you neglect a key part of history, you misunderstand the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so just about every historian of the anti-slavery movement has talked about Millerite or Adventist abolitionists, but never identified their religious tradition. And so I wanted to write to an academic audience as well, because I think that needs to change. And so if I write to that, if I really establish that with the highest levels of authority and credibility, then I think it will have a trickle-down effect. But I also think this is, I don't know, I hope you liked it, Simona. It's a narrative, like especially when you get into chapter 1, especially by chapter 2, it's just a narrative, and it's very colorful. There's a lot of interesting things that happen in this book.
Yeah, and a lot of new things that I've not even known.
Yeah, almost
And I'm
all
not
of it's
sure I
new.
could find it anywhere else.
Yeah.
I don't think I could find it. The way it's compiled, it's really easy to follow and understand. Do we have another question before we kind of close out and have you guys grab a book, sign a book? Yes.
Yeah, Kevin, and I could ask you this in private because I see you a lot. But as we're talking, I really have a question. That is, how would you like to see the Adventist Church change as a result of understanding this history and the principles involved, which really relate to biblical principles of social justice?
That's exactly right. I would love to see our church at all levels not be afraid to say what we all will say in private, I think, which is that racism is a sin, and be active about fighting against that sin. There's no question on this one. This is not a debatable thing. Every single person is created in God's image, and from my perspective, I think if you read the Bible as it's written and intended by God himself, if you have a problem with any person's physical body, then you have a problem with God himself, because they are the image of God. And so that is serious. And why is it that Christians of all people cannot say that? Why is it that Christians of all people are usually, at least in this country, the part of the problem rather than the solution? I think there's an answer, at least in the history here. And so I would love to see, maybe that's too naive and optimistic of me, I would love to see us reclaim our identity. Adventists today, I'll speak personally for a moment. I know that not everyone here is an Adventist, but Adventists claim to have an important role in the last days of the earth's history. Well, that's very prideful of us to say and claim. If you look at how the movement was called out, I think it's very inspiring. And you see that, Adventism would not exist without the abolitionist movement, friends. It wouldn't exist. There's many reasons. I give only one answer to that in this book, which is coming out of Babylon. If Adventists didn't leave all those other churches, there would be no Seventh-day Adventist Church today. It wouldn't exist, right? And if there's any truth to any of that kind of thinking, then it has to be in the same spirit of when God originally called these people out. And he never called us back in. He never called people to go back into Babylon. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, I guess. So
I'm going to just say I picked three conclusions, but you've talked about it. But whether or not we agree with every reformer, this book forces us to wrestle with what faith looks like when we're confronted with injustice. We have no choice, and our faith should create action. No matter what your belief system is in this space, your faith must create action. I don't know, sometimes I get discouraged of the systemic marginalization of races and people and ideas. It can be discouraging. And then this comes along and allows me to have verbiage in the spaces that I have to hold. And I hope that happens for everyone here, that you at least have now, you're armed and equipped with a little bit more to go out and do what God has called us to do in whatever shape or form. I'm not asking everybody to pick up signs and march down here and stop traffic. Let's not do that. But let's do what we can do in our corner. There's a song I grew up with, Brighten the corner where you are.
that's right.
Brighten the corner where you are.
That's right.
Brighten the corner where you are. And man, there's so much more we can say, but I'm going to let you have the last word. Any other questions? Oh, yep, we got two. So you'll have the last word.
Yeah, maybe not a question, but taking about your last answer about how this must impact the Adventist Church. I think it's tremendous work, but somehow, at least from my context, there are some people that do not read English.
Yeah.
And I know it's not easy just to copy and paste and then have like any other language book.
Yeah.
But it would be really important, at least from my perspective, because even the administration where I came from, they didn't even for me, I cannot go back to my own country. And that for me, I make a lot of reflection in what kind of Adventists, we are just presenting to the world.
Yeah.
And people from government and just,
Yeah.
it's really hard. But I will really love to see this book in many other languages because it would be even more nice.
That would be wonderful, of course.
It's not easy, but
Yeah. Yeah.
never impossible.
It's not impossible. Yeah, thank you.
There's a large display case outside of the Center for Adventist Leadership. I think we need this
Yes.
in that display case, plus as many pictures, charts, graphs as you can conjure up.
I've got quite a few that I've found.
Very good.
Yeah, and purchased for Carr. Yeah, I mean, at some point we can do a display on this because there's a lot of things that are just kind of hiding in our vault that would be super fascinating to see. Yeah,
Good.
yeah.
A question over here.
Madeline, yeah.
Not a question, but a couple of comments here. One is that I enjoyed this very much, and partly because a few years ago I happened to learn that I had a great-great-great-grandfather in New York.
Jotham
Made his
Aldrich.
own
Yeah.
space station on the Underground Railroad. And when he did so, his local pastor, not Adventist, but I think the Methodist Church coming
Yeah.
in town there, disfellowshipped him
Yeah.
because of his stance.
Yeah.
And I found that very interesting. The other thing I'd like to say, not related to your book, but maybe related to you, some of it, but I feel it needs to be said. I have not only sat where I could enjoy hearing you, but I've sat where I could enjoy watching these beautiful children. And I want to say these children have been so good. They were quiet, well-behaved, doing their artwork here, rather than picking out pages to give the others so everybody has enough paper.
Yeah.
Just generously helping each other and being so sweet about it. And I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. They're amazing kids. Well, friends, I don't have anything profound to say to end on. This book represents about a decade of my life, and it's kind of been actually a very sobering thing to see it come out because one of the first thoughts, not the very first thought, but one of the first thoughts I had when I held the book in my hands is like, it's a decade of my life. I hope it was worth it.
Now that's profound.
Is it? I don't know. It was just a thing. So I do hope you enjoy it, but you know, it's out there, and if you read it and like it, that's going to make me smile. So thanks for coming, and I'm happy to sign copies if you want them signed, and chat if we can. And
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
yeah.
Round of applause.
Thank you.
So I do know that I try to download it on Kindle, so it's coming out
June
1st, I think?
June 2 is the
June
official
2.
date, and like
Okay.
the big booksellers, they actually are going to ship it that day.
Okay.
So that's unfortunate. But we got permission to release it early here. I know not everybody can get it early, but you guys can. But not, unfortunately, just the paperback, not the Kindle. We don't have access to that yet, even. And I think we had one hardback, but please don't buy it. My goodness, I don't set the prices on these things. You know, $100 for the.
Well, no, it's a weighty book.
It's well, I'm glad that they came out with a paperback immediately because it's affordable, right? So, anyways, yeah, thank you all for coming. Yeah.
Another round of applause, and then come